Africa Business News, proudly sponsored by EY.
Africa, it is huge, it is diverse, and its business landscape fascinating and dynamic. And that's our business here on your favorite weekly African business stop. In Nairobi, Bonitunya brings us the latest from East Africa. Esther Aoyin in Lagos gives us West African news. And joining me in Johannesburg is Tumisho Greater. My name is Victor Homoeswan, and this is the Africa Business News. Mambo Boni, Ethiopia headed to the polls last weekend with the ruling party, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, expected to win. How did it go on Sunday?
Well, Victor, thank you. The Ethiopians, as you are aware, voted on Sunday in a parliamentary election that was expected to hand a landslide win to the ruling party, which it actually did. And the ruling party, Victor, boasts of delivering strong economic growth, while opponents complained that their supporters were harassed by the ruling and the government of the day. Now, the ruling party, led by Haile Mariam Desalegn, which won the vote, has been in power for almost a quarter of a century now, Victor. And the Ethiopian People's Revolution Democratic Front, with a very long acronym, has also overseen the transformation of a nation that was on its knees after the communist purges and famine to one that now attracts foreign investors, that is Ethiopia now. But critics say, Victor, that there is very little room for dissent in this country. The parliament's outgoing 547 seats had just one opposition member. Experts do not expect a major shift in opposition or policy on regards of this vote. But the Prime Minister, Haile Mariam Desalegn, took over from Meles Zenawi, the rebel-turned statesman who died in 2012. So obviously it marks a very good and new opportunity for Ethiopia. And outsiders are looking in with the hope that finally Ethiopia will be opening up, not just for other African partners, trade partners, but for the rest of the world in terms of foreign direct investment and more.
On another story, the risk of talking about the biggest players, Bonnie, is that we overlook those that are chasing them up for the top spot. We focus a lot here on Africa Business News on Safaricom, but it looks like Airtel is a serious and aggressive challenger. Tell me about this company, and particularly its financial inclusion campaign with the Visa Airtel card, as well as their recent announcement of lower call rates to Africa and Europe.
Interesting, Victor. I mean, you're right. Airtel brand has played second fiddle for a very long time now, and it's now keen to be moving from that spot. You see, the businesses in Rwanda and in general can now communicate with relatives, friends, and business associates in Europe and other South Sudan and other African countries because of what they're calling as affordable rates, courtesy of Airtel. And this is an attempt by Airtel to sort of regain the market space. We know that in Kenya particularly, Safaricom has taken the lion's share, but elsewhere outside the Kenyan borders, Airtel is quite a worthy competitor. And according to Teddy Bula, who's Airtel Rwandan Managing Director, Rwandans can now make calls to EU at a more cheaper rate. And this, is, Victor, will be seen as a selling point for Airtel, particularly at a time where the East African community has been struggling with having a single tariff system where they can make calls across. So, I mean, this could be seen like Airtel's latest charm offensive, and in a bid to woo its customers from Safaricom and the other operators.
If you're a mobile phone subscriber, you'll say, hooray. Thank you, Bonitunya, coming to us from Nairobi, Kenya. Our next stretch sees Tumisho Greater joining us to talk about some of the big stories from Southern Africa. We're still on Africa Business News, and in our Johannesburg studio, I'm with Tumisho Greater. Tumisho, last week we talked about Vodacom feeling the pinch of the mobile termination rates in the results, but the bigger player on the continent, MTN, in spite of the Nigerian story where the power outages are threatening to cut telecommunications here in South Africa, facing even the closure of one of their call centers. What's going on in mobile telephony, especially at MTN?
That's right, Victor. As you rightly said, Vodacom has been under pressure last week. MTN feeling the pinch from one of the, rather being a player in the two biggest economies on the African continent, Nigeria, as we know, with the fuel shortages. But here, about 2,000 workers went on strike and saying that they would like an annual increase in their bonus of of 16%. Also requesting for a pay hike of 10%. And of course, this led to the closure of their call center, as you correctly said. Now, adding to their woes, and this is not just for MTN, but for Vodacom as well, Cell C has come on and said for anybody who belongs to either Vodacom or who also belongs to MTN, we will buy you out of your contract. So come to us. We will buy you out. Now, the chief executive of Vodacom has said this is merely a gimmick, but as you can imagine, the telecom sector has been under huge amounts of pressure. Again, the regulatory changes that we have seen playing up. We've seen job cuts. This is because most companies right now are trying to adapt and make sure that they are leaner. But with this landscape and what's currently going on with these price wars, this is definitely something interesting to look at.
Wow, Cell C sounds like the Airtel of South Africa. But last week, the Monetary Policy Committee kept rates unchanged at 5.75% with a very hawkish tone, I must add. It sounds like the next move is going to be upwards if economists tell us the risk to the inflation bracket is higher and higher. What do you make of that?
Definitely hawkish indeed, and inflationary pressures to the upside is what we're seeing here. Now, Victor, let me just take you back about a few months ago. IMF's Christine Lagarde said central banks of emerging markets, and of course that includes us, need to make sure that they have their central bank in order. So what this means is what happens when the US eventually starts to normalize rates. We will definitely be influenced. So we are watching very closely the data that comes out of the US. Just this week we're expecting US durable goods, which is an important measure. We're also expecting US GDP numbers, and next week one of the most important ones out of the US is the non-farm payroll numbers or the jobs numbers. All of these are important in order for the Federal Reserve, and that's the US Federal Reserve, to decide whether or not or when they're going to start normalizing those interest rates. And of course, us being South Africa, very vulnerable to any sort of moves that the Fed does. And of course, we have seen that dollar strength coming to the fore. So, Lesetja Kganyago, our Reserve Bank governor, is definitely watching this, and this also plays a role in the hawkish tone that they had.
Well, the beauty of globalization and the ugliness of it at the same time. Tumisho Greater, thank you very much for joining us. Next up, we have Esther Awen in Lagos to chat to us about West Africa. Esther, President Buhari, president-elect, he will be president soon, visited the UK recently. I trust, among other things, he talked to the oil majors while out there, because back home in Nigeria, there's a triple crisis: a power generation at an all-time low, a fuel crisis which threatens Africa's largest economy, especially the mobile telephony, as well as MTN, the largest operator, warning against that. Please give us the lowdown on the state of play.
Victor, it's been a very unfortunate situation unfolding here in Nigeria. Now, the current fuel crisis is one of the worst we've seen in years. Both petrol and diesel became very scarce. There was a major disruption of economic activities in the country, and this is what forced a telecoms giant like MTN to issue a warning to its customers, saying it can no longer guarantee optimal service delivery as it too was fast running out of diesel. Commercial banks also sent out early closure notices to their customers because they simply couldn't operate without diesel. Now, this situation just brings to light the extent of dependency on alternative power sources by Nigerian businesses, as supply from the national grid simply falls short. However, the strike action by the fuel marketers has been called off, and the situation is expected to ease in the coming days.
Esther, another topic for discussion in the UK will be the legacy of President Goodluck Jonathan. Break down the story of this unresolved $470 million sale of the National Public Security Communications Network to a private company. I say not a very good decision when Nigeria is facing the problem of Boko Haram, but you know a whole lot more about this.
Yes, Victor, the outgoing president is yet to assent to the transaction which a government advisory panel had declared a compromise of national security. Now, the NPSCS is a $470 million three-component of highly sophisticated communication system conceived by the federal government. Now, it was designed and built by a Chinese firm, ZTE Corporation, to boost the capacity of the Nigerian police and other security agencies to battle crimes, particularly terrorism. Now, one of the licenses which was given to a private company, Open Skies, for $6 million is the bone of contention here. It's a 450 megahertz frequency spectrum said to be highly sought after, not only because of its expansive commercial potential, but also because it can easily be maintained. Also, the equipment to run and maintain it can easily be gotten even off the shelf. Now, many have queried the wisdom of transferring ownership and management of what has been described as a national security resource to a private company. Some civil groups, society groups, are urging the incoming government, which will assume office this week, Friday to be exact, to probe the transaction.
Well, the final story is about agribusiness, fishing to be precise, and it has a Chinese angle to it. Tell us about the recent report by Greenpeace warning of the rising tide of illegal fishing in West African waters by Chinese vessels. Africa and China need to sort this thing out, considering how explosive illegal fishing is to maritime stability. We are talking the risk of piracy in the offing here.
Absolutely, Victor. And this report made very interesting findings. It revealed that at least 74 Chinese vessels have fished illegally on prohibited fishing grounds off the coast of West Africa, according to findings from a 2-year study by these organizations. Now, according to the head of the Greenpeace East Asia Chinese Ocean campaign, while China extended a hand in friendship during the Ebola outbreak, rogue Chinese companies were unlawfully exploiting West Africa's marine environment. Now, the report also stated that from the year 2000 to 2014, there were 82 suspected cases reported of illegal or unregulated fishing and cases where vessels underreported their catches in order to evade fees and access restricted zones. Now, to put this into perspective, Victor, China has been experiencing a decline in domestic fish stocks, and this has led to a surge in the number of Chinese fishing boats in Africa, climbing from around 13 vessels in 1985 to 462 vessels in 2013. The Chinese boats caught an estimated 3.1 million tons of fish off West Africa, of which an estimated 80% was unreported.
Thank you, Esther. We're now in Lagos, Nigeria. Next up, we get to hear about the favorite stocks of Esther and Bonnie. Stay with Africa Business News. And at this point, we ask Esther and Bonnie to tell us their favorite stocks from the different parts of Africa they are in. Which share would you recommend I buy this week, Bonnie Tunya, out of Nairobi?
It will be for beverage maker EABL. I mean, they're doing pretty well. If you look at the share price, 270, hasn't lost more than 10 points in the past several months. Last week, they were a bit down just about 10 points. But this is a good company. Look, they introduced Origin into the Kenyan market, largely successful in the other markets in which they operate. So this is a good place to put your money.
East African Breweries Limited out of East Africa. How about you, Esther Awin in Lagos?
Well, this time I'll stick with the consumer goods space, and I'll be going with Dangote Cement. Now, as you know, this company is doing great things. It's literally taking over the African continent, expanding aggressively in 16 African countries outside of Nigeria. So it's going to be a great year for Dangote Cement. And of course, I'm going to stick with that winner.
Well, that's it for this week's edition of Africa Business News. We thank Esther Awin in Lagos, Bonnie Tunya in Nairobi, and earlier on, Tumiso Greater here in Johannesburg. I hope you had a great Africa Day. Stay tuned to CNBC Africa. Until next week, kwaherini mabibi na mabwana.